Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly. So again, welcome to the Clythe Creek Subwatershed Study Update. This is our first public session for this project. And we're really pleased that everyone could make some time tonight to join us for this session. So I'm going to start by introducing myself, which would be a good idea. So my name is Margot Ursick. I am a facilitator and a natural heritage planner, and I will be wearing both hats tonight, both facilitating this session and also providing input on natural heritage questions and comments as needed. And I will pass it over to Leah to start the presentation.
Great, thanks, Margot. I think we'll begin with land acknowledgement. So Kelly, if you don't mind advancing the slide. As we gather, let us take time to reflect on our privilege to live and work in Guelph, a city built over rich Indigenous histories. We are guests here, and we should reflect upon the responsibility to care for this land, the people who live here today, and the generations to come. If our actions today can move us toward reconciliation, we should take pause and make those decisions with intention and gratitude. This place we call Guelph has served as traditional lands and a place of refuge for many peoples over time, but more specifically, the Attawandaronk and the Haudenosaunee. This land is held as the treaty lands and territory with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Guelph lies directly adjacent to the Haldimand Tract and is part of a long-established traditional hunting ground for the Six Nations of the Grand River. Many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples who have come from across Turtle Island call Guelph home today. With that, I'll pass it over to Margot.
Thank you very much, Leah. So next slide, please, Kelly. So for this particular project and this presentation, what we thought we would do is demonstrate the multidisciplinary approach that's been taken to this study by having the various team members here, each speaking to where they're at in the project so far, basically. So Leah Leffler, who just spoke, is the project manager for the city. Steve Chips from WSB is the overall project manager and the surface water lead. Ron Scheckenberger, who's not here this evening, is a project advisor. Darren Abbey from Matrix Solutions is here as our senior hydrogeologist and the groundwater lead. John McDonald from Matrix Solutions is our stream dynamics lead. Cam Port here from Port & Associates is our aquatic biology lead. Christina Olar from Dugan Associates is our terrestrial ecology lead. And then myself, as I mentioned, I am both the engagement lead and a natural heritage advisor. So you are going to be hearing from all of us today during this meeting. We obviously have also had input and assistance from a number of people from the city throughout this project. And continue to support us, as well as others on the consulting team, providing a whole range of technical support tasks. Next slide, please, Kelly. So in terms of using Zoom, I think everyone's probably pretty familiar with it from now, but the way that we've set it up for the webinar this evening is if you have a technical issue or problem, please put that in the chat. If you have a question, please put that in the Q&A. And certainly, if you need the subtitles or would like them, there is the live transcript function at the bottom of the screen. As Leah mentioned, this presentation is being recorded, so at any time, you'll be able to go back onto the city's Have Your Say page and log on to the presentation if you would like to review it or share it with anyone. Also, if you require an alternate accessible format or communication support, please reach out to Kelly Guthrie, who is also helping us behind the scenes here at 519-362-1152. So again, in terms of questions, no, you know what? I'm going to get to that in a second. Next slide, please. So what is the purpose of this session? So the first thing is really to let you know what we've been up to inform you about the study update, The second one is an opportunity for you to share your perspectives about this project and to ask the city, as well as our panel of experts who are here, any questions related to this project. Next slide, please. So in terms of our agenda, I know we're a few minutes late, so we'll try and get through these first slides a bit quicker. So we've got our welcome introduction, Zoom basics, and our territorial acknowledgement, which we've just done. And we've basically broken out the presentation into 3 parts. So the first part is going to be shortish, just focus on overall study rationale. Why are we doing the work? What's the scope of the work? And the process for the project? How long is it expected to last? Then we'll break, and we have our Leah, myself, and a couple of other people are going to be monitoring the Q&A. And so hopefully we'll be able to get through all of the questions. We've got about 15 minutes after that. Then we're going to shift into part 2, and that's really where we get into more the details and the technical content. And so each of the experts that we have here today and the disciplines will speak to the work that they've done. So give you an overview of existing conditions, work done to date, as well as the work that still needs to be done over the course of the project. And then the third part is going to be a short piece. So looking at anticipated outcomes and next steps. And then again, we will break after that component as well. We'll be checking the questions and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to address all of those during the 2 hours that we have this evening. Next slide, please. So we're going to launch right into part 1 of the study. And I'm going to pass it over to Steve Chips, the project manager on the consultant side, to speak to the study rationale, scope, and process.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Michael. Okay, so we'll start off with what is a subwatershed. So a subwatershed is a drainage area that drains to a common point. So that includes watersheds and subwatersheds. And a subwatershed is basically an area of land. Oh, the slide just changed.
My apologies. Your slide is coming. 1 second.
No problem.
Except for the blue circle of doom. There we go.
Uh-oh. Okay, thank you. That's okay. We're down to what is a subwatershed. That's a slide that should be showing. Yeah, keep going. There you go. Thank you. Okay, so as I was mentioning, a subwatershed is a land area that drains to a common point through drainage features or water courses and the associated water catchment areas. So why do we assess at a subwatershed scale? First of all, it's a science-based approach in that we can characterize the water resources and the natural heritage systems within the area that drains to a common point. And it's also supported by the province through various acts. And actually there is a subwatershed guideline and that is draft as in 2022. And there's a previous manual prior to that. Using a subwatershed scale, we can assess the natural heritage and water resources systems, and we can also then develop a monitoring approach to both of those systems. Next slide, please. So why is this particular study important? So I'm just going to move my slide here. So the original study was done back in 1998. And so we've had a fair amount of time since then, and there have been quite a few land use changes that have occurred. And there are more changes planned within the next 25 years. So that's the main reason for having this study. This study will make recommendations for a sustainable land use plan approach, and will consider the protection of local drinking water, look at the management of stormwater. It will prioritize infrastructure improvements such as drainage improvements or stormwater management improvements. Can you adjust the slide slightly? Sorry, I'm just not seeing the entire slide.
I'm not sure if I can.
Okay, that's better. And then lastly, the study will recognize the interrelationships between the natural heritage and the water resources systems and the connections in between those two features. Next. So where's the study area? So it's located both within the city of Guelph and within Wellington County. The area within the city is the purple dashed line on the figure, and that is the primary study area. The second study area is in the orange dashed line representing the lands within Wellington County. So we are assessing both the primary and the second study areas. And in addition to that, beyond the primary and the second study areas, there are other things to consider, such as groundwater resources and connections to natural heritage system. So those both have to be considered beyond the study area boundary. Next. So the study timeline, the study is broken up into 3 phases, and we're currently within phase 1. And phase 1 includes basically the characterization of the existing conditions. And as part of that, we had to develop a technical work plan. So that's what we're following to assess the existing conditions and also complete phase 2 and 3. And phase 1, 2, and 3 all include engagement such as tonight. Phase 1 then, the study commenced back in April of 2022, and phase 1 will continue on until the end of this year, with the team basically working on the characterization report. And phase 2 and 3 will be in the subsequent years of 24 and 25, respectively. Next. So as you can imagine, there are related studies to the subwatershed study, and there's a whole list of them. I'm not going to go through every single one, but I will touch on a couple of the key ones for this. So there is the York Road phase 4 detailed design that's ongoing, basically out to the city limits and right through the middle of our study area. And it's right adjacent to Clythe Creek itself. And then we have the Stormwater Management Master Plan that just recently was completed, and that provides guidance to the city with respect to drainage and stormwater management, not just in Clythe Creek, but the overall city. And so we'll be incorporating the findings from that study into this one. There's the Water Supply Master Plan. And there are other studies that have to be considered and integrated appropriately into our assessment within the study area. Next.
Thank you very much, Steve. That's great. So we're going to pause now. So I don't see any questions. Can someone from the audience, I see there's now 13 of you there. You just put in a test. I just want to make sure. I know we've had a few technical hiccups this evening, but I do encourage you to put any comments or questions into the Q&A, and the appropriate person from our team will try and give you a response. Ah, terrific. There we go. Thank you. At least I know it's working now. Okay. So, Leah, what have we got? Does the sale of the Ontario Ontario Realty, what does OR stand for? I don't even know. Property have any impact on these studies? I'm wondering, Lynn, are you able to clarify what OR stands for? I just want to make sure.
It's
Margo, I think
Ontario Reformatory.
Yeah.
Oh, Ontario Reformatory. Okay. I always think of it as Guelph Correctional Center lands. Okay. Will it have any impact on these studies? So, Leah, did you want to take a stab at responding to that?
Yeah, sure. So future phases of the project will consider land use change and recommendations. So on a high level, it will identify recommendations that may have implications for the future use of the property. One component, which we'll get into later, is we're doing some updates to our natural heritage system based on field work. And so the implications of that would mean if there's an expanded area of natural heritage system within the study area, that would have implications for lands that may be used for development in the future. That pertains across the study area, not just to the Ontario Reformatory property. So yeah, I think that's it. Like this, the province is looking to dispose of the lands or to sell the lands. But in terms of how that the sale of the property is related to the project, I would say it's more in terms of kind of secondary to the recommendations that may come out of this project.
Okay, that's great. So another question I see here is, will the York Road Phase 4, so that's the road widening, be going ahead before the study is complete? So Leah, I think that's another one for you.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, thanks for the question. We are in the process of, well, our engineering department is in the process of doing the detailed design for York Road Phase 4. We also have a multi-year budget going to council in November of this year. And so we'll have a better idea of what the scope and scale and timing of various projects, including York Road, will involve at that time.
Okay, great. And then I see one more question here. So we've got, have you consulted with the Ministry of Transportation on the increased particulate runoff from more lanes for York Road? So I know it's confusing because the Clythe Creek Subwatershed study area includes, like, overlaps with so many other studies. But I suspect, Leah, that one falls within the York Road widening study, not this particular study, correct?
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Okay, that's great. Oh, another question. Terrific. Does the study determine whether Clythe Creek will be moved? So again, that is not really within the scope of this study. So Leah, I don't know if you wanted to speak to that a little bit.
Sure. The widening of York Road and the creek realignment is part of the York Road Phase 4 project, and the scope of that project will be confirmed and reviewed through the multi-year budget process that is going to council in November.
So I recognize it can be confusing dealing with it, like, what's the scope of these different overlapping studies? One of the ways that I like to think of it is the studies providing kind of base environmental information to inform some of the other work. So whether it's the planning, the road widening study, a variety of other things. So it's providing sort of the information on the groundwater, the ecology, surface water, to inform some of those other studies. It's kind of like the bigger picture, if that helps.
Margot, one thing I would add to that is that there needs to be an integration between the various studies. So as you said, this study provides characterization of existing conditions, which helps the York Road design team. But vice versa, they are working on a design which we will have to integrate into this study, such as drainage and stormwater management recommendations. And we can look at that and provide advice back to them through this study.
Yes, Steve, that's a very good point. It's a bit of an iterative process as we go forward. Was there anyone else from the study team who wanted to provide an additional thought or comment? Okay. Oh, I see one more. Okay, so this is about cold water fisheries. So I'm just going to ask you to hold that one because we're going to touch on that in part 2, and then we'll come back to a response to that question. So that's a great lead in. I'm going to suggest that we move forward now. So next slide, please, Kelly, and we will jump into part 2 of the work. So this is really where we're getting into the different discipline updates. So next slide, please, Kelly. Our overall approach to this study has been targeted data collection from the various disciplines, building on existing information that's already there. There are, as you saw from Steve's timeline, there's assessment of multiple years of data involved in this study. So 3 to 4, again, depending on the locations and the scale of the discipline. Certainly, as we've talked about already, consideration for integration of the information is a key component to the study approach and really critical. Collaboration with the various different areas, jurisdictions. So certainly half the subwatershed studies in the city, but the other half is not. The other half is in Wellington County, primarily in Guelph, Aramosa Township. There's a tiny little piece in Puslynch as well. And the Grand River Conservation Authority has played a really critical role and will continue to play a critical role. So in the ongoing collaboration, and then engagement. So events like tonight, but already there's been engagement with a technical project-specific technical advisory group we've met with on a couple of occasions already. The City's Natural Heritage Advisory Committee, outreach and engagement with Indigenous nations has already taken place and will be ongoing, as well as outreach through this engagement process at this meeting and through other activities going forward. Next slide, please, Kelly. So again, a very high level summary of the work completed to date, and then I will be passing it over to the disciplines to speak to this in much more detail. So really, there's been completed a review of relevant and available backgrounds and documents from a whole variety of sources, both mapping, data, and background reports at various scales. Confirmation of the study area boundaries, again, based on the background and updated information from field studies. The city has worked very hard to secure access to various lands so that we could undertake multi-year field monitoring and install wells. And again, I'll let the disciplines speak to that a little bit. There's been an engagement plan prepared as well as a technical work plan to guide both, obviously, the engagement and the technical work. No surprise there. And as I mentioned, preliminary engagement has already taken place with the city's Natural Heritage Advisory Committee, an expanded project team, Indigenous nations, and the technical advisory group. The first 2 years of field data has been almost completed. We're just at the tail end, obviously, of 2023. And initial models have been developed for both groundwater and for surface water. So quite a bit of work has been done already. And I will now pass it on to Darren to speak a little bit more in detail to the groundwater.
Thanks, Margot. So we get to start from the bottom and work our way up to the surface, I guess, in this order. So as many of the people who are on the call and live in Guelph know, the city relies on groundwater for its potable water, and most of it comes from deep bedrock aquifer. Within the Clythe Creek Subwatershed, the Clythe Creek well is currently permitted to provide 39 liters per second, but it's not currently in use. This same groundwater system or groundwater that flows through Clythe Creek also supports local streams, creeks, and other natural areas such as wetlands. Going to the question that was actually posed already, there is some groundwater discharge that we have measured in the lower reaches and some in the upper reaches of Clythe Creek that may support cool or cold water aquatic habitat. But Cam will talk a little bit more about the aquatics in a few slides. There is a pretty strong policy framework around groundwater protection in the province right now, including source water protection legislation, and those policies and legislation are there to protect groundwater for both potable and ecological functions. Next slide, please. So the map on the right is actually some output from one of our preliminary models, but it's a spatial representation or map of groundwater recharge, and that's the portion of groundwater or portion of precipitation that infiltrates into the ground and would make it to the water table. What we know from looking from our background review, the data we've collected in the preliminary analysis is groundwater flows generally from north in the subwatershed to the south. The recharge, as the map shows on the right, ranges from about 150 to 300 millimeters per year. And for reference, precipitation is in the 900 millimeter range. So up to a third of that. Recharge is greatest in the sand. So those are the dark blue areas on the right-hand side. Oops, sorry, my camera keeps cutting out on me for some reason here. The dark blue areas correspond to some of the sandy areas. The lighter blue areas are more of our less permeable materials, sort of silts and clay soils. And then the white areas along the creeks that you see mostly on the right-hand side of the figure, those are areas of groundwater discharge, and that's happening in both the upper and lower reaches of Clythe Creek. What you can't see on this map are bedrock valleys that insize some of our deeper bedrock units, and those locally influence groundwater flow directions. Next slide. So how are we measuring groundwater? How are we understanding it? There's obviously a lot of overlap between groundwater and surface water as they're connected systems. And a key piece of understanding or insight that we want to gain from the subwatershed is areas where groundwater and surface water interact, as they often support a variety of habitats. On this map, you'll see a number of symbols representing some of the data and locations. So for reference, we've identified Clythe Well there, which is basically at Watson and York Road, but north of York Road, almost in the middle of our figure there. There are a number of monitoring well locations. So there's 3 locations, one in Haddadi, one in Watson, and one in the upper reaches of Clyde, those green symbols where we drilled new monitoring well locations to understand more about groundwater elevations and groundwater flow directions. We also have a number of surface water stations, both existing ones that the city had, as well as 3 new stations that were installed in the lower reaches of Clythe Creek, and they're used to understand both groundwater flow, but also the interaction with, surface water flow, but also the interaction with the groundwater systems. And then we also have spot base flow locations, and these are locations where we visit multiple times and we measure stream flow as a snapshot in time, and they help us map out areas of groundwater discharge or leakage from the stream to groundwater. Next slide. Really, our objective of the monitoring and background work is to assess that whole integrated system of groundwater and its interaction with the surface water system. So the data helps us to understand those interactions, and it allows us to actually build models that simulate both groundwater flow and surface water interactions under existing conditions, and then allow us to simulate potential future land use conditions and alternative ways to manage water and manage groundwater and development, and assess the benefits and challenges with each method. So those models use the observed data as calibration of the models. So if the models are able to simulate the groundwater levels that are measured in the field and the stream flow, then we know that the model is representing the conditions, and we can use it for some of the forecasting. Next slide. So where are we? As Margot mentioned, there's a lot of work underway. I mentioned that we're monitoring groundwater levels to understand groundwater flow, seasonal changes in flow, groundwater discharge, and the influences of groundwater use within the subwatershed. We're also trying to understand groundwater surface water interactions by measuring stream flow and groundwater levels. And this has a direct connection to understanding the different aquatic habitats, such as cool or cold water or warm water. Characterization of of existing groundwater flow conditions allows us to understand areas that are important for recharge or discharge or may support certain features such as wetlands. So helps us to identify any constraints or opportunities when we're looking at future land use, and allows us to design management approaches that can protect these features. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, we've developed an integrated surface water groundwater model that allows us to represent existing conditions and also represent potential future land use conditions and compare the effectiveness of different management options. And I think that's it. And I'll pass it over to Steve Chips, who'll talk to you about surface water.
So Steve, before you jump in, Kelly, I am noticing on my screen still that bottom line is getting cut off on some of the slides. I'm just wondering about the view. I don't know if other people are seeing that as well. No, that's worse. Actually, it's better the other way. Okay.
All I did was unmute.
Oh.
I don't know what it's doing. I can stop share and then I can do it so it's not showing as the actual slideshow, but we're just going through the slides, because then it, I think, makes it smaller on the screen.
Okay.
We can give that a try.
Sure, let's give that a try. I thought it's only on the few slides that kind of run right to the bottom, but I thought, anyway, I moved them all up and I thought we were clear.
I thought we were too. Okay, hold on.
Thanks, Kelly. We're the guinea pig, the new version of Zoom guinea pigs.
Now I have to remember which one showed everything and which one just showed. I don't think that's any better.
It looks the same. It's not worse.
Yeah. Doesn't really give me a view option. Wait.
Oh, there we go.
So that's like, I'm not actually in the slideshow, but you can see some other stuff, but can you see the bottom better?
Yes, the footer actually comes up now. So I think that's better, because it was just on some of those that gets cut off. So, all right, that's great. Thank you, Kelly, for the on-the-fly troubleshooting. Go ahead, Steve. I'll let you go.
Thank you both. Now I can actually read the bottom of the slide. Okay, so moving on from groundwater to surface water. The figure that you see on the side there, you can basically see two colors, one kind of blue, the other one green. The blue drainage areas or catchment areas that have been pulled in from the city's stormwater management master plan. So as I mentioned, we have various studies that feed into this one. And we have been taken the modeling that was done from the stormwater management master plan and have pulled it into this study. So that's why you see all those little blue areas there. They're very detailed. They include storm sewers, overland drainage areas for each catchment. And then in the green, you see areas that are being added by the subwatershed study team. And so there's green areas or catchment areas within the primary study area, which has been the city of Guelph. That is basically Clythe Creek, part of Clythe Creek, and then it includes Haddadi Creek. And you can see in the text that the areas for Haddadi and the area for Watson Creek, with a primary study area being about just under half of the total drainage area, surface water drainage area for Clythe Creek before it discharges to the Alamosa. So in the green, those catchments, and you can just see faintly blue lines there representing the boundaries. Those areas are being added in, and within the secondary study area, the catchments basically represent overland drainage because there really aren't storm sewer systems out in the secondary study area. So those catchments are not necessarily as small as you see in the blue. So why do we do this modeling? The reason we do the modeling is, one, to determine flow rates at key locations within the subwatershed study area, and also runoff volumes. So that provides us a way to characterize how much flow is going at each location, and then to use that to determine flow depths and velocities or speed within the water courses. Next slide. So how do we prepare this modeling? Well, part of the information that feeds into it is noted there in the first bullet. So that includes soils, land uses, which also relates to the hard surfaces. And then we also put in the sewer systems, overland drainage routes, and stormwater management facilities, or ponds, as some people would call them, into the model. So what you see on the right-hand side, there's a soils map, and it characterizes the types of soils within the study area. And we need that because certain soils infiltrate more than others and have more runoff than others. The second map provides basically for hard surfaces, or we call them impervious areas. And for green is a low percentage of impervious coverage, with the red being the highest. So as you go into the city, obviously there's more hard surfaces than what you would have in the secondary study area in the countryside. So to make the model as accurate as we can, we have to calibrate. And Darren spoke a little bit about this. There is a monitoring network out there for groundwater and for surface water. And I'll speak to that in a little bit. And we calibrate the model basically to peak flows and runoff volumes at key locations. If you can go to the next slide. So as far as the monitoring locations are concerned, which are used to calibrate or to make the modeling more accurate, as Darren mentioned, there were 6 stations that were in place prior to the study, and we've added more stations to one on Clythe Creek, and 2 on Clythe Creek within the lower reaches, actually 1 just upstream of the Alamosa. And what these stations do is to measure the depth of flow that occurs. And then we, through survey of those locations, we can determine the amount of flow at each location. And then we compare that to what the modeling is telling us, and adjust the model accordingly to calibrate it. So in addition to flow, there is water quality monitoring, and the stations measure temperature and conductivity. And in addition to that, for 2 years, we will be sampling 12 precipitation events. And there is a suite of water quality parameters that are tested for each event. Next. So once we've determined flows at key locations, the next thing to do is to determine the flow characterization. And what I mean by that is, what is the depth, what is the velocity of the speed of the flow, what is the elevation, and the extent. And the reason we need to do that is we need to map where the flooding occurs. So the plan that you see on the right-hand side there provides two colors, and it's a preliminary, I would say, flood extent map. What we're doing there is comparing existing map into what we've developed, and that mapping is, it's not the actual mapping what we'll end up with, but it's an initial start, and we're going to be working on that in the next month or two. So we will be preparing regulatory floodplain mapping within the primary study area within the city for Clythe, Haddadi, and Watson Creeks. And that's as a request and as part of the terms of reference for the study with GRCA. And then they will use that as a tool for regulation within the city. Beyond the primary study area, we will be looking at a more higher level or coarser level of assessment for flood extents. And it will not be through a calibrated model, and it will only be a guide as to where flooding occurs. It will not be used for regulatory purposes by GRCA. So the model will be calibrated to observed flow data, but only within the primary study area within the city. And that calibration occurs right up to the east boundary of the city. And again, it's used to determine what we call regulatory flood events, which is the regional storm Hurricane Hazel, which or the 100-year storm, whichever is the greatest. And that's used by GRCA for regulation. Next. So with that, we're going to pass it on to John, and he's going to speak about stream morphology or stream dynamics.
Thanks, Steve. I was going to start off with that. So stream dynamics just sounds like a cooler term for fluvial geomorphology, which is what we're focusing on our component. It's essentially trying to understand the form, so the physical form, characteristics, composition of these streams, how they are adjusting, whether there's natural adjustment or sort of accelerated adjustment that you may expect in urban areas. Steve talked about infiltration, or talked about hard surfaces, and that tends to lead to more runoff, which has a reaction in urban streams. So that also in turn has another reaction with engineering intervention to try and reduce impacts of erosion and risk. So, so just a general introduction to how we approach things with geomorphology specific to watercourses there. In the study area, we're mainly focused in the city for our detailed studies. So we're looking at Clythe Creek and its tributaries, Haddadi and Watson, that have already been identified. In general, within the city, development's already historically happened for the most part. And so several of these reaches, you may already see them along Haddadi and Clythe. They've been straightened, armored to prevent erosion or address an erosion issue, piping and other grade control structures. So those are like little weirs that help control the slope of the watercourse to reduce in-stream velocities and stresses. Through our cursory level investigations and desktop and initial field surveys, there's quite a few segments that could benefit from rehabilitation and enhancement. And those are sort of recommendations that come out further along in the study, in the subwatershed study. So ultimately we go from a characterization of these features to sort of management, and it is integrated because stream morphology does really relate. There is a groundwater influence, but the surface water and the stormwater and runoff has an influence on channel shape, which then also has an influence on aquatic and riparian habitat. So a lot of integration happens here in order to get us to the end of the study. But right now we're just trying to characterize these things. So next slide. Just want to define a couple of key terms here. So there are watercourses everywhere. There are depressions on the landscape. But the term watercourse and headwater drainage features do tend to have different implications for how they're managed and regulated. So here we're just defining them separately. So a watercourse is sort of your main channel, it's well defined. It could be a permanently flowing or intermittent feature, which means it sort of responds to rain events. It's well defined. It's got a balance of erosion and deposition. Like it's not entirely an erosional feature that you might see in like a headwater, and there's it's migrating, and in these southern Ontario systems, we tend to have meandering streams in a floodplain. And then a headwater drainage feature, we often use the acronym HDF as a non-permanently flowing feature. These are sort of your smaller drainage features on the surface that are at the periphery of the watercourse. So they're contributing flow and sediment, but they're not necessarily well defined. For identifying them at the initial stages, we're looking at a drainage area of 50 hectares. So that's saying anything greater than 50 hectares in drainage area, we consider that a watercourse. Anything less than that, we're considering an HDF, just as we sort of start to go through the initial stages, and then we would recommend that gets confirmed in the field. And collectively, they sort of act like capillaries of the subwatershed. So they're very important for water storage, flood control, and downstream contributions of water sediment and other habitat contributions. Just want to get that out there. So next slide. To date, we've done a delineation of the watercourses. So we used updated topography. We ran some GIS, some tools on our geographic information systems to get an updated watercourse network, and we confirmed that against air photos and field mapping. Darren had already talked about reaches. So reaches, we've segmented the subwatershed into segments of watercourse that we're calling reaches, and they're segments of watercourse that have similar characteristics in terms of their shape, their hydrology, so how much flow is coming into them, land use, vegetation, geology, and sediment type. And so that gives you a sort of a unit to characterize each reach or each part of the watercourse, and then you can compare them and evaluate sensitivities, relative sensitivities, and stuff like that. And it lends well to managing things, because you're able to narrow it down to a specific length when you're talking about that. So we've gone through the field, we've gone through the desktop analysis, and then in the field we walked all the watercourse reaches within the city, and we completed check sheet forms to say, okay, presence or absence of indicators of stream stability and stream health, for which we were able to then say how stable something is, based on what we see today. We identified obstructions to fish movement and potential obstructions, confirmed the erosion sites from previous studies. So the stormwater management master plan, it had identified several erosion sites through Clythe Creek. So we've confirmed that they're there, we've mapped them, and then if we've seen any other ones, we've identified those as well. We've done watercourse crossing assessments, so that's just evaluating whether a bridge or a culvert has been sized appropriately, or if it's potentially at risk, or if there's any issues with it that we could see. So is it starting to show signs of wear? Then, again, that comes into recommendations further down. We've delineated headwater drainage features just through our desktop mapping, and then when in the field, if we do see one, we will identify it and confirm if it's there. But the detailed studies for that aren't within the current study, and so there will be recommendations made for completing that in the future. And then based on our assessment of stream stability, we've identified two particularly sensitive, but two downstream yet locations that might be sensitive to future development. And that doesn't mean that they're unstable. It's just that they were actually in a fairly stable and natural condition. And so a change would have an impact to those otherwise natural features. So if you go to the next slide, in this figure, we're showing the headwater drainage features that we've been able to identify as pink line work, and then we have color coding for the stream reach stability. So whether something is in regime, which is stable, in a stage of transition between stable or unstable, or in adjustment, and that's unstable. And so we do have a range of that. Several of them do exhibit stability, even though they're straightened or they are hardened, they may still show stabilization. And a few sites are out of phase, and so they are unstable. And then there were several that we couldn't actually assess because some of these streams are very low gradient, low slope, heavily vegetated, and there's multiple channels. So it's almost like the water course is going from a meandering channel into a marsh even. So we're identifying and characterizing them. They just couldn't be characterized in the typical way for stability. There's several obstructions to fish movement. You can see them from York Road along Clythe Creek, and those extend upstream into Haddadie and even into Watson Creek. And I've already spoken about headwater drainage features, so the next slide might. Yeah, so just we're doing some ongoing historic assessment. So we're reviewing things like air photos and mapping to see whether changes that we're observing or the certain stability that we've observed, whether it's something that's a natural progression in response to, say, like a high urban flows, or whether it's something that's been deliberate. So we can kind of tease those things out with air photos and just bolster our interpretation. We'll be delineating hazards, erosion hazards. So you're just delineating or outlining a corridor where a water course may exist within a certain horizon. So it's just where you anticipate that erosion may happen. And so we look at, in this case, meander belts. We're doing, like I said, a high-level characterization of headwater drainage features. And in some cases, we may be able to land on some management recommendations for them just based on other constraints, like if there is a groundwater constraint or a fish constraint or some other feature that might say, hey, we need to protect this. We can get to that at this stage of study. And then we're going to be determining erosion thresholds. So we completed these detailed sort of topographical and material surveys of these sensitive reaches, one on Haddadie and one on Clythe. And then from that, we can evaluate entrainment, we complete entrainment calculations. So it just lets you know when you can anticipate that the material that is on the bed of the channel or on the bank of the channel is expected to move and under what flow condition. Then we share that with the water resource engineers. So Steve will get it, and then he'll evaluate against the modeling to see how often it's anticipated that something's going to start to erode under existing conditions and then under future conditions. Next slide. Oh, and pass it over to Cam Port, our fisheries biologist. Aquatic biology.
Cam, I'm just going to jump in here quickly again. We've had a few questions pile up, and I'm just thinking we can address one of them right away, probably. So, John, if you just hang on with me for a second here. There's just a quick question about the detailed location that you had at Clythe Creek, on Clythe Creek near Watson. They're asking if it's north or south of York Road.
So we have, our detailed site is at the north side of Watson. Or north side of York Road on the east side of Watson.
Okay, great. Thank you for clearing that up.
Mm-hmm.
And then Cam, I'm just going to flag for you because I don't think you're seeing all the questions. Maybe, and you can think about this when you're going through. So is there any prospect of Clythe Creek becoming a cold water fishery stream within the city limits? So I think you're going to be speaking to that, but I just wanted to flag that for you, and I will let you go ahead, Cam.
Sure. I think we're one slide ahead of where we wanted to be here, perhaps. No, I guess we're not. Well, we are, because there appears to be a slide not there. But so from a local context standpoint, Clythe Creek is classified as a cold water stream by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. And that's based on the presence of mottled sculpin and historically in the 1950s brook trout, both of which are considered cold water fish species. Watson Creek is also classified as cold water by MNRF. Hadati is classified as warm water. Now, in order to have a cold water stream, you need groundwater discharge. Otherwise, they're too warm in the summer to support what we refer to as cold water species. And based on the review that we've done of background information, the water temperature data, which are largely upstream of Watson Parkway, indicate that Clythe Creek is not a cold water stream, that it's a cool water or a warm water stream. So there's a bit of a conflict there in terms of their classification and what those data say. Now, we have established 6 aquatic monitoring sites where we look at fish, benthic invertebrates, which are aquatic insects and clams and crayfish and so on, and also characterize the habitat. And those are the red dots that you see on this map. There are 3 on Hadati and 2 on Clythe and 1 on Watson. Those are intended to be, should it be desired, long-term monitoring stations. So the data have been collected in a specific way following acknowledged protocols, and people will be able to go back and repeat that work in the future. We've sampled fish at 6 additional sites where we've only sampled fish to try and get a better handle on what's there, particularly in Clythe Creek. We've also sampled the ponds on the OR lands. The next slide, please. And the most interesting finding, in my opinion, is that mottled sculpin, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a cold water species, were captured at all 3 of the locations that we electrofished on the south or downstream side of York Road. But they weren't found at the monitoring station just upstream from Watson Parkway. And that suggests that there is groundwater along the south side of Watson Road coming into Clythe Creek. Something is keeping it cold enough to support this species. And as you can see from the picture, this is a catch from that area. It's not just one fish or one age class of fish. There are, I think, 3 different age classes of sculpin there. So there's a population that's living there. The other point is that in Hadati Creek, upstream from the railway, there was only 1 species of fish captured, and that was bluegill sunfish, which is not a species that's typically found in small watercourses. And we suspect that they are in the stormwater ponds in that system, and that's where they are originating from. So they move out into the creek or get washed out when there's a big storm into the creek. Next slide, please. So what's underway? As Darren and Steve mentioned, there are temperature loggers that are associated with the surface water stations, so we'll be getting data from those. The benthic invertebrates that were collected as part of the establishing the 6 monitoring sites have yet to be identified. We send those out to an expert to do that. And then, as everyone previously has mentioned, there is a big job to integrate all the disciplines so that we can come to an understanding of what's happening out here, and particularly with hydrogeology, because it is so important to stream temperature and to those cold water fishes. And I think with that, I will turn it over to Christine.
As for last year, let's dive into terrestrial ecology. So the city's current natural heritage system, and I'm just going to define that acronym in case I use it later on. If I say NHS, that's what I'm referring to. So the currently mapped NHS in the official plan is largely based on work undertaken as part of the city's natural heritage strategy, which was completed in 2009. As shown on the slide, the city's existing NHS covers approximately 23% of the primary study area, and it's comprised of those 4 components, which include significant natural areas, restoration areas, natural areas overlay, and ecological linkages. So as you can see, the relatively high proportion of the designated restoration areas is largely attributed to portions of Eastview Pollinator Park and the Guelph Innovation District lands. The ongoing terrestrial work as part of the Subwatershed Study update will involve refining the existing NHS based on more recent data collected within the primary study area. So this will include targeted seasonal field work undertaken, which began in 2022, along with other data that we've gleaned from related studies that have occurred within the PSA, and additional relevant supplemental information provided by other partners and stakeholders. And next slide, please. So the most recent comprehensive land cover data set dates back to 1997, at which time the land cover in the PSA primary study area was mainly urban and agricultural. Natural and naturalized communities within the PSA were comprised primarily of upland, forest, and woodlands, followed by meadows, wetland, plantation, and aquatic communities. Land cover within the PSA has obviously changed substantially since the last comprehensive land cover inventory, particularly with land being transitioned from agriculture to residential and other urban land uses. Field verification of land cover types is being undertaken within the primary study area in order to update and confirm the existing conditions. Field verification is focused within natural areas on accessible lands, while interpretation of current aerial photography will be used to refine the remaining areas. And next slide, please. So in terms of our targeted field work that we've been conducting, seasonal field work in 2022 and 2023 so far, which includes vegetation community surveys using the ecological land classification protocol for Southern Ontario, a variety of plant surveys, inventory work, wetland boundary refinements in consultation with GRCA, and wildlife habitat assessments, which include winter wildlife and bat habitat surveys, breeding surveys for birds and frogs, road mortality and movement surveys, and turtle basking and nesting surveys. And next slide, please. So this figure just shows everywhere we've been within the PSA. Our various survey types are shown there. And as noted previously, our field surveys were focused on natural areas that we had access to. So the results of these field studies will be used to characterize the current land cover, plant, and wildlife habitat present within the PSA as a basis for natural heritage system refinements, impact assessment, and development of management strategies to preserve the long-term functioning of the system. And next slide. And in terms of work that is underway, we've got supplemental field work ongoing. Right now, we're mostly focused in on gap filling. So looking at what we've got so far from 2022 and 2023 and looking at where else we need to go to get, that very important plant and wildlife data. Background and field verified data is being consolidated, analyzed, and synthesized to inform the existing conditions within the primary study area. And the existing conditions will inform those refinements to the city's natural heritage system based on the consolidated data set. And as many others have mentioned, integration with the other disciplines will be key, as well as looking at the official plan designation criteria for features that are within the NHS. And a parallel step involves compiling current NHS mapping within the secondary study area with guidance from the county. And with that, I will pass it back to Margot.
Thank you very much. So that was a ton of terrific information. Thank you very much, everyone. I've also been really impressed by the diversity and level of detail of the questions. The questions have been great. And so there's a couple more here. I think this one is a Steve and Darren question. So it's, do you account for large fluctuations in data due to climate change? So how are we accounting for climate change, drought years versus heavy rainfall years? So I'm thinking maybe Steve, you want to take a stab at that, and maybe Darren might want to chime in as well.
Sure. Yeah, we can both chime in on that one. So for the current characterization of surface water and for groundwater, we are using a what we call a climate data set, and we are using data, local data, precipitation data to run. I think it's 53 years through the modeling and to get results for that precipitation data set. For the next stage of a project, which is the phase 2 impact assessment, as we indicated, we will be including climate change as part of the consideration, not in addition to land use changes. So as part of that, we have to develop a revised climate data set, and we will be working with the city on that. There are a number of approaches. We haven't finalized the approach yet, but there are a number of approaches that we are considering for that data set, such as, the simplest is an adjustment based upon a percentage. Or we can use something like the global climate change models, and we use a local version of that, and we apply the change in precipitation to our original precipitation data set and come up with a new set. So that's two approaches. There are other approaches in addition to that. So Dan, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I think you covered everything I was thinking of, Steve. It's important that in both models we will have a future climate data set that we can run through to understand what the implications might be on runoff, groundwater levels, groundwater discharge, all those pieces, to understand the sensitivity of the system.
Okay, that's terrific. Thanks so much, Steve and Darren. So the next one, I'm thinking maybe Leah, this one is for you. So it's asking about restoration, terrestrial or aquatic, and asking if it can be accomplished on, again, the Guelph Correctional Center or former Guelph Correctional Center lands, while it's not under city ownership.
Yeah, that's really a legal question. I don't have an answer to it. I would anticipate that that some sort of agreement would need to be in place with the province for any work to proceed, but that's one that would better be answered by someone else at the city other than me, so I can follow up and post a response to that question after consulting with other city staff that are more informed on that topic than me.
Okay, that's totally fair. Thank you, Leah. So I know that was a lot for people to digest. So I'll give a few minutes to see if there's any other questions or comments on all the material that was shared by the various disciplines related to this project, before we jump into the final portion of the presentation. So there's a question about now Infrastructure Ontario. Are they aware of the study? They are one of the groups that have been engaged. So yes, they are well aware. I believe, Leah, you spent quite some time facilitating access to the lands, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right, Margot. And early on, and if you compare the subwatershed boundary to previous mapping, the work that this study team has done has really helped to refine and better define the extent of the Clythe Creek Subwatershed. And it does extend quite a lot onto the Ontario reformatory lands. Previously, it sort of cut off, the mapping of the subwatershed cut off at York Road. So early on, we realized we needed to secure a permission to enter agreement, or basically official permission from the province to access the lands. And so, yeah, we have been able to complete the field work. So they're aware of the study and have been part of the process from early on.
That's great. Thank you, Leah. It also reminds me that actually doing a subwatershed study update where at least north of York Road, a lot is developed, has actually been in some ways advantageous because a lot of the green spaces are in the city's ownership. And so it's actually made it easier from that perspective than a subwatershed study where everything is greenfield and much of it is still privately held, and securing access can be challenging sometimes. So it has been actually something of an advantage in this study. Okay, I see another question popped up. So it's a question about the once in 100-year event. So is this appropriate now, or should we be using once in a 20-year event, which might be more representative of climate effects? So I'm thinking maybe Steve, that's another one for you.
So just to explain for those who don't know, a 1 in 100-year event is not an event that occurs once every 100 years. It's a 1 in 100th chance of occurring every year. So it's based on probability. Same thing for the 20-year. It's a 1 in 20th chance of occurring every year. So as he indicated, we will be, as part of the phase 2 impact assessment, we will be assessing climate change for the various land use scenarios. And as part of that climate change, it will be shifting the frequency flows. So frequency flows are based on doing a long-term determining a meteorological data set and then running it through the model. And then we determine frequency flows, such as a 1 in 100 chance of occurring. So if the precipitation data is going to be adjusted for climate change, then what we will see is a shift in the flows accordingly based upon that precipitation data set being revised for climate change. I know that answers the question.
That's great. Thanks very much, Steve. Okay, I'm not seeing anything else right now, but we've got another opportunity for questions after this next bit of the last bit of presentation. So I think we'll keep rolling then. So next slide, please. So this is a relatively short part of the presentation as we wrap up, and it's just Steve's going to provide us with anticipated outcomes of the study at a high level, what we know right now, and next steps. So Steve, I will pass it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Margot. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we've been talking about the various disciplines. We've covered groundwater, surface water, the natural heritage system, which is terrestrial and aquatics, and we've also covered stream dynamics or stream geomorphology. But with respect to recommendations, there will be recommendations coming from all the disciplines, but recommendations with respect to groundwater specifically are to ensure that there's a local potable water needs are met, and that natural heritage features are also not impacted by any impacts to groundwater. And that's the interconnection that we have to consider in between the different resources. We will be preparing, as I mentioned, floodplain mapping just within the primary study area, and that's for Clythe Creek, Watson Creek, and Haddadi Creek. And right now, based upon discussion with GRCA, the drainage area as to where the regulatory floodplain mapping will be stopped is 50 hectares. And that's a typical industry standard for where you would stop a regulatory boundary. It doesn't mean that we don't map flooding for less than 50 hectares. It just means that it's not regulatory. There will be, as mentioned, updated natural heritage system mapping that will be prepared, so that Dugan and associates will be preparing that. And on my end, there will be recommended stormwater management approaches. So we will be building off the city's stormwater management master plan. And there are recommendations already within that master plan for stormwater management, including Clythe Creek. But we will be looking at refining that based upon our modeling and integrating the John's findings on stream morphology for erosion assessment. So that will be one of the things that we consider. We will also be considering low impact development measures. So some people on the call may know that the province has draft requirement for retention of water or precipitation on lands, and that ranges from 25 millimeters up to the high 20s, depending on where you are in the province. So we will be considering that as part of the recommendations for stormwater management. Second last, we need to look at the partnerships that are already in place, and there are a number of them. But key partnerships, obviously, with the city as to how the natural systems within the subwatershed are protected and enhanced. And lastly, developing a mountain framework for both the natural heritage system and the water resource system, and to make sure that, one, it's maintained, and two, that if we're looking for enhancements, but yes, we actually are seeing enhancements based upon our recommendations. Next slide. So we are currently within phase 1, characterization of existing conditions. Going into 24, the study will be migrating into phase 2. And as part of that, we will be taking our existing conditions characterization and then looking at different impacts from land use and climate change to all of the various components of the study, not just surface and groundwater, but the natural heritage system and aquatics and terrestrial ecology and stream morphology. And once we determine the impacts from those various scenarios, we will prepare a comprehensive impact assessment, which will then be shared through the phase 2 engagement with the public. So that's next year. And then the year after that, into 25, we'll be developing management and implementation recommendations. So how do we deal with the impact assessment and mitigate it, and how do we improve upon existing conditions where appropriate? And that will then be shared through the phase 3 engagement before the end of 25. Next. So immediate next steps, as we've discussed, we've done a lot of field monitoring starting back in 22, and we're going to continue that through into 24, including the surface and the groundwater and the other disciplines. And we are going to be completing the characterization of the existing conditions report, which is basically our next step. Once we wrap up our modeling, specifically for groundwater and surface water, that will start to be prepared. And then late 24 or into early 25, we will be sharing our findings of the existing conditions report, and probably some findings from initial findings on the impact assessment will be included in that as well. Next. So with that, I'll lead it back to Margot, and we can have further discussion on questions.
Thank you very much, Steve. So thank you everyone for sticking through a kind of long, but hopefully for those of you who are here, an interesting presentation. A lot of information shared. I don't see any additional questions. So was there anything perhaps that the team wanted to add? Okay. It's a lot. It's a lot to digest in one session, for sure.
Yeah. So I would add that the team has done, and the city and in consultation with GRC and others, has done a lot of work to date. And you're only seeing a little bit and a summarization of that on this PowerPoint. And obviously we will be able to share more next year when the characterization report has been prepared. And I would think that the next presentation will probably be a bit more interesting than this one, because we'll actually be able to share some of our key findings.
For sure. Thank you, Steve. So, oh, I do see another question. Okay, well, thank you. It's thanking us for the comprehensive information. If anyone does have, actually, you know what? How about we jump to the next slide, because it helps me answer this question. There we go. So there is a Have Your Say page for this project, and that's going to remain posted for, up until the end of 2025. And so there's an opportunity there to submit questions and comments. There's also contact information for both Leah and Steve on this slide. This presentation will be posted as a PDF, I believe. We will also, we'll need to process the recording and probably break it into pieces, but we will be posting this presentation as well. And then as deliverables for the study are completed, those will be posted as well. Oh, thank you.
I'm sorry, that was an accident.
Well, that's okay. This is what the Have Your Say page looks like. That's great, Kelly. Thanks.
I don't know if I can go back.
We're good. We're good.
There we go.
It's the last slide anyway. So that's available. So if you log off today and you're like, oh, I really have a question, you can provide those to city staff at any time, as well as to our team. And we will make sure that the right person is able to provide a response to you. Okay, I don't see anything else. Leah, did you have any concluding remarks or thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Margot. Just one follow-up. So for the question that was asked about restoration and work on the Ontario reformatory lands, I will post or use the question and post that on Have Your Say. And once I find the response from the correct person at the city, the response will be provided there. So check back on the Have Your Say page. And again, if any questions come to you, or if you have any other thoughts on what you've heard, you're more than welcome to reach out to me or Steve and post your comments or questions on the Have Your Say page. A big thanks to everyone for attending tonight. It's really great to be able to share this important study with others in the community. And it's also really great to hear and see the great questions that are being asked. Guelph is known for having a really engaged community, and that was definitely evident tonight. So thanks all for your participation.
Okay, great. Yes, thanks to everyone for participating, for your great questions. I just wanted to mention again, a reminder, so there's 3 phases to this project. This is the first phase, so there will be again an opportunity to engage after the impact assessment, and again after the recommendations are shared with the community. So keep your eyes peeled if you're interested in this study. I think you can sign up for updates on the city's website to the Have Your Say page. And I think with that, we can wrap it up, say goodnight, let everyone go, and thanks again for everyone's participation.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone. Have a
everyone.
good evening.
All right, good night.
All right. Is it okay if I end for everyone?
Yep.
I think we're
Thanks,
good.
everyone. Great job.
Okay, Leah,
Thanks,
did
good
you
night.
want to, okay, we'll leave it for now.
I'll be on the Teams if you want to talk to me.
Okay.